Hello, my name is Nour Abdelaal. I'm a policy analyst at the Leadership Lab at the Toronto Metropolitan University. For the past 2 years, I've kind of been delving deep into the digital divide issue at the lab. So I lead the digital divide portfolio. We worked on an Overcoming Digital Divides workshop series where we brought in thinkers and experts from government, private sector, nonprofit, and community sectors as well to discuss ways to close the digital divide and expand digital inclusion. And from there, we've done a little bit more work with the City of Toronto and the federal government as well on more granular focuses of digital equity. So we've done some work with the City of Toronto on their digital innovation plan, on their digital equity side of that plan, and as well as like alleviating digital barriers to education for youth with the federal government. So we've been working for quite some time now on a lot of like these specific digital divide issues. I think a couple of key things in general, looking at kind of how the digital divide issue has been presented in Canada generally. So I think in the beginning, we're looking for kind of a more comprehensive strategy to close Canada's digital divide on a more national scale. And this would include setting targets for kind of the proportion of Canadian residents that need to be that are connected and that still need to be connected to sufficient digital services, defining what sufficient digital services actually means in relation to people's needs. Instead of just focusing on basic connectivity, basic infrastructure, that's kind of where the conversation has mostly focused on. Is there the infrastructure to connect? But even if there is the infrastructure to connect, there are still specific identifiable underserved communities that still lack access. So shifting the conversation to kind of more granularly and specifically identifying where those communities and where those needs are would be, I think, the first step. And then there are some affordability initiatives, communities that I'm talking about, like low income households, Indigenous populations, people with disabilities, newcomers, immigrants, recently immigrated. So a lot of these communities are still looking to be connected and have very specific, unique needs that must be addressed. So there are things like affordability initiatives that provide subsidized internet services to, for example, low-income households. But we think that expanding the eligibility criteria of these initiatives to kind of include all individuals below the poverty line in Canada can also ensure that services are provided at sufficient speeds for everyone at a price that they can afford to ensure meaningful digital inclusion for all. We're also thinking about kind of new public funding models to expand and invest in community-based networks, community-based and owned internet networks to increase public access, community control, competition, and to ensure that those services are provided by the communities themselves that need them and that know their unique needs and what they need out of these services. So thinking about like Indigenous communities, municipalities even, that are more in tune with the kind of specific needs of their communities. And the digital divide issue has kind of been presented in very siloed formats. You know, a lot of organizations are working on different aspects of the digital divide, kind of without talking to each other. So we think that like developing a cross-sectoral network of all the public, private, and community organizations to coordinate their initiatives would be a better way to kind of take the conversation moving forward. And these organizations are also working on like different aspects of digital divide, like digital literacy, access to devices, software, refurbished devices, and all of these different things. So bringing those conversations all together, I think will help identify gaps more concretely for underserved and vulnerable communities. And lastly, of course, strengthening our accessibility standards to remove like digital inclusion barriers for people with disabilities and ensuring that there are greater enforcement mechanisms to ensure that everyone can kind of access the internet equally and easily in a meaningful and safe way. I think I would say first and foremost, like to change how we think about technology. A lot of times we think about technology as, especially if you're not, you know, a software developer or a coder, like you think of it as a very far off thing that's that somebody else designs and, you know, you kind of have to take. But I think it's good for us to think of technology as a tool in our hands and to think of the administrators and the designers of the technology as kind of stewards of what is supposed to make us better humans and what is supposed to make us more compassionate and more empathetic and more connected to one another in a healthy, productive way. So I think taking ownership of this technology and realizing that it isn't a far off thing from us, that it's something that, you know, is something that we all use now. So it's almost like we kind of all have ownership to this technology as a collective voice. We have a lot of power to influence the decision making behind how this technology is designed and how it's developed and how it's presented to us. And I think I would start thinking about myself more as kind of an active user. I would advise people to think of themselves as active users, thinking about how can I be using this and how can I be using the technology itself, but also my skills and my expertise and from wherever background I come from, whatever, you know, education that I have, whatever degree that I hold, like how can I use those assets and those skills that I know I have to empower others to use this technology in a safe and meaningful way as well. It's a cross-sectoral issue. It impacts all organizations, all institutions, all people, and all individuals. So I think to become more conscious users is an important thing, to understand and take the time to know what my rights are on the internet, what my rights are on these social media platforms. Are they being met? And to stay informed. I think a lot of times, you know, the onus is on us to kind of understand what our rights are and to teach ourselves what those look like and how and to assess ourselves whether they are being met or not, and then to vocalize those voices and those opinions. And yeah, to find out like what avenues can I exhaust to really to make my voice heard if I see something that I don't like, or if I feel like something is impacting me negatively while I'm using this technology. I think shifting that mindset to a more active vocal user is helpful for everyone. We are no longer, you know, we are at an age where people are born into this technology. So we can't say anymore that it's new or that we don't understand it or that it's something that, you know, doesn't really impact our lives. It's here and it's here to stay.